All right. 3:45 in. Good day, good evening. Welcome everybody. And we're going to be covering some technical science, some real science tonight, some electrolysis. And in between Bert and Ernie here, I've got a couple of electrolysis jars with some magrav coils. Also, what I believe to be what the MFMP, Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, calls a Lion reactor, only I have it in salt water as part of the cathode, along with the magrav coils. And as I plug these in here, then we're also going to be playing some of Alchemical Science. Shout out to Jordan with excellent channel Alchemical Science, where he will be covering a lot of Bob Greenyer's work, as well as Malcolm Bendall's and the plasmids, the plasmoids, what essentially we're going to see turning on and being formed in front of us. So we'll just go plug it in, turn it on. And we got the switch. The power is on. Bubbles will start coming out soon. We will be forming hydrogen. Sadly, though, for some reason, right? So epic. Boom. Boom. I love it. Love Bob. Love everyone at the MFMP. All right, so I'm having weird problems tonight when I pull up the other camera. For some reason, I've tried everything. It's just StreamYard's giving me weird issues, and it gives the crazy echo reverb, even though everything's muted out. It's quite bad, but maybe if I take myself out, I might be able to get the other camera up. So bear with me for a moment here while we see if we can get that to work. All right. Nope. Horrible. See, it's still even smoother. How about now? No. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah. So I guess we can't have the other camera angle tonight, which sucks, but oh well. We'll play the video and have one camera angle. I guess I'll adjust it here and we will play some of Chemical Science.
To be sticking to layman
Let me know
terms
if you can
and
hear
keeping
that.
my language as simple as possible. As usual, Bob's announced his findings in all their technical glory over on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project YouTube channel already. And I encourage anyone who has experience in chemistry, physics, or other related fields to go and watch the original videos, particularly anyone who has experience with the scanning electron microscope and that type of laboratory work. What I aim to bring to the table with my videos is just in their simplicity, their broad accessibility to alternative-minded scientists, home experimenters, and the generally curious public. So it's important to me that the world moves together on this technology. With that in mind, we need your help. Once you've got your head around this, if you're seeing what we're seeing here, and you understand how important it is, please share this information as widely as you can. So let's get into it. What is this old new technology? What is it doing? What are the processes behind it? We're going to start with the basics here and just build up to the most recent findings, tell the full story. So essentially this technology itself, no matter which system we're discussing, is all about water bubble cavitation. So in simple terms, this means forming a bubble in water with a few specific requirements and then collapsing this bubble. So we want to do this because when bubbles are collapsed or imploded under just the right conditions, what Dr. Matsumoto termed electronuclear collapse, they produce an unusual phenomenon. We call this phenomena a plasmoid or a charge cluster, ball lightning, or an exotic vacuum object. So essentially the bubble, when collapsed symmetrically into this toroidal geometry, produces a homeostatic fractal ball of lightning that does not immediately dissipate, and which can actually feed on anything surrounding it, taking in surrounding gases like hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide, and even denser matter like carbon, iron and other heavier elements, ripping them apart at an atomic level and harvesting them as energy. So any deconstructed excess energy to the requirements of the plasmoid is ejected in the form of free protons and electrons, which then quickly reform and synthesizes new elements. So this process of stepwise synthesis or transmutation has a signature pattern, which Bob has clearly identified and outlined in his new findings, but we'll get to this soon. So the reason why they're sometimes referred to as charge clusters is because ball lightning is fractal in nature. Smaller homeostatic structures collect together to form larger homeostatic structures, and this is all occurring fractally on multiple levels. So Bob often refers to this as a wheel within a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, a phrase I've also used to describe this concept in the past. And this is actually from a Bible verse.
So momentarily going to pause that here while I adjust the camera to show the hydrogen being produced, as well as some of the monoatomics, the little plasmids within the water here. And great question, Dazzle. I believe Jeremiah is working on a specific project at the moment that's taking up the majority of his time, but hopefully we'll be having him on soon with a live demo of what he's been up to. And yeah, no, I messaged him earlier tonight seeing if he was available, but I did not get a reply. Sadly, yeah, the imploding toroidal explosion, right? The implosion, the cold fusion, natural side, the other side. All right. Anywho, I guess I will let Jordan play. And now I'll just adjust the screen here quickly and the camera to show what we got going on. There we go. There we go. You can see a bunch of hydrogen bubbles forming here, and the monoatomics down there, monoatomics here, hydrogen coming up there, monatomic fields in the jars. Anywho, back to Jordan and his explanation of what all of this stuff is.
These phenomena are also found to be naturally occurring, and a sighting of ball lightning whizzing through the sky or flying out of a power line or an electronic device seen as a child has been the inspiration for many researchers' later interest and careers in this field of study. I've certainly spoken to many. So after they're formed, the toroidal plasma structures are then employed in subsequent phases of the system to instigate further reactions. So for example, in the thunderstorm generator, the primary focus so far has been on the transmutation of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and hydrocarbons from the exhaust waste stream of the internal combustion engine and coal power plants generators into oxygen, nitrogen, or other more suitable elements in this context using no additional energy input. So this gives us a mechanism with which we can essentially control all pollution caused by the burning of any carbon-based fuel source, and also remediate degraded environment.
Like that's absolutely huge. With being able to, with no extra energy apparently input needed to transmutate CO2. Wow. And dioxide and monoxide.
Land, air, and sea almost effortlessly, considering we already use combustion engines for nearly everything. And there's also some increased fuel efficiency in the engine due to the plasma structures being both a charged fuel source themselves and a catalyst for the synthesis of other combustible elements, like increased ratios of hydrogen and oxygen that can go into the engine. So various other cavitation systems, some of which I mentioned earlier, are producing these same ball lightning structures, which are leaving behind the same highly cohesive pattern of geometric and chemical signatures. The goal of most of these systems has been primarily to just be able to observe and study these formations and reactions and explore how they can be reliably reproduced on a small scale, But in the case of the thunderstorm generator, it's actually in the pre-production prototyping phase already, with the eventual goal of being mass-produced and rolled out on scale to solve a number of practical global issues. And this is kind of updating every week, getting it much more serious. So to summarize, the various instances of the technology, including the thunderstorm generator and Dr. Bin Zhuang Huang's reactors, the systems we will be primarily focusing on in this video, they're all used to produce tiny water bubbles, which are then imploded under specific conditions to form homeostatic fractal charge clusters, which we call plasmoids or ball lightning. And these plasma structures are then used as a catalyst for further reactions.
And that is a key point that Jordan brings up right there. The triple solenoid wheel within a wheel within a wheel, or field within a field within a field. And that's exactly what we have right here that you're looking at that are wound, and as some of the electrodes and anodes that I'm using in these specific jars. And that it creates the plasmids and moids and EVOs. And what Jordan says next is absolutely crucial.
Which can transmute one element to another element. And they can also act as a fuel source themselves. So there are various other processes behind the overall results obtained by specific systems. The thunderstorm generator, for example, creates extreme hydrodynamic shear in the next stage of the system by polarizing two opposing hot and cold, expanding and contracting counterclockwise and clockwise vortexes, much like the Runge-Hilsch vortex tube, which you all may have heard of by now. So this appears to amplify the results that can be achieved with such a system dramatically. And it takes advantage of much the same process that's involved in the generation and formation of plasmoids themselves, just on a larger scale simultaneously. So this is where we need to introduce the story of Bob Greenyer and Malcolm Bendall. So Malcolm Bendall is the inventor of the thunderstorm generator. He's developed his own model of physics called the plasmoid unification model, built on direct observations of natural phenomena. He works with the likes of Nikola Tesla, Martin Fleischmann, Ken Shoulders, and incorporating the work of some modern names like Randal, Carlson, Marco Rodin, and some much more ancient names and texts too. But in this model, he explains the nature of physical reality through considerations of geometry, resonance, and numbers, natural form and function. It's a unification model. His model is expansive, and it serves as the framework within which he designed the thunderstorm generator and some of his other future technology. So I'm a serious student of Malcolm's theory, and you can find numerous videos on the channel about plasmoid unification model and the thunderstorm generator. So go and check out those after this one if you'd like to learn more about that. And if you want to find more about Malcolm himself or get access to his open source notes, you can visit his website, strikefoundation.earth, or soon to be strikefoundation.org, I believe. And you can also find Malcolm's lecture series on HowTube, which Randal Carlson assisted him with. All right, the other name I mentioned, Bob Greenyer, is an open source volunteer researcher at the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, a group of independent scientists who are carrying on the work and legacy of Mr. Fleischmann, who was a British electrochemist and a cold fusion researcher who unfortunately passed away in poor health and without really seeing mainstream acceptance of his work in 2012. So Malcolm Bendall spent a week with Martin Fleischmann in his later years as well, discussing cold fusion, and promised him to help finish his work. So Martin's research has been a common inspiration for both Bob and Malcolm. But going back to Bob himself, he's been involved in this research for at least the last decade. He was one of those guys I mentioned that saw naturally occurring ball lightning when he was younger and just couldn't shake the curiosity until he eventually devoted his life and career to solving the mystery. So Bob's been involved in numerous experiments studying cavitation and ball lightning over his decade with MFMP, such as his work on the supernova reactor, the Ultra experiments, Neil Crichton Gold's Lion reactor, Hank Urian's Vega experiments, Malcolm's thunderstorm generator, and of course his work with Dr. Bin Zhuang Huang and their colleagues on their fusion reactors in Taiwan. And their recently published peer-reviewed paper in the journal Nature on the same, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But these projects only really constitute the tip of the iceberg of Bob's knowledge and experience. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of current and historical cold fusion research. Over the course of his decade with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, he's reviewed and shared the work of many other significant contributors to the field, including a number of experiments and documents of which had not been publicly available in English before. Some significant names in the field that Bob has either collaborated with or promoted or reviewed the work of throughout his time with MFMP include Takaki Matsumoto, Ken Shoulders, Anatoly Klimov, Anatoly Nikitin, Max Fomitchev-Zamiliev, Alexander Shishkin, Alexander Parkanov, Slobodan Stankovic, and this list is in no way definitive. You'll find the work of many other global fusion and cavitation researchers showcased for reference over on the MFMP YouTube channel. And I can't stress how important this repository of open source research actually is, because if you start Googling some of these names, you'll find that a lot of this stuff is really not that easy to find if you're not directed explicitly where to find it. So Bob Greenyer has made a name for himself in the field as one of the world's foremost experts in ball lightning plasmoid research. He has spent a decade establishing a framework within which these phenomena can be reliably synthetically reproduced and studied. He's co-author of perhaps the world's first peer-reviewed paper on water bubble cavitation and ball lightning, published in a major journal. Again, we'll talk about that in a moment. And his most recent findings may just constitute one of the most important scientific discoveries, or more precisely, rediscoveries, evidently made in recorded history. No small thing, and we'll be getting to those findings shortly. First, though, we'll finish off the story of Bob, Malcolm, and Dr. Huang, who all play a major role in this. Bob and Malcolm's stories converge shortly after the thunderstorm generators unveiling at Tesla Tech last year. A mutual contact arranged a meeting between Bob, Malcolm, and some of the other independent engineers and scientists who had worked on retrofitting the thunderstorm generator with Malcolm before the conference. And Bob was invited to come and independently perform his own investigations on several prototypes, including the smaller generator retrofits and the large Perkins grid-tied thunderstorm generator installation in the UK. So he was admittedly initially somewhat skeptical. He's dealt with a lot of these systems before, some real, some fake. But he was encouraged by the fact that Malcolm allowed him free rein to run and perform testing on the unit. And Malcolm didn't insist on being present during Bob's investigations. So he went ahead with this. So after this, Malcolm invited Bob to speak with him and give his independent review of the thunderstorm generator, his hypothesis for how it worked, and his considerations on the engineering of the device at a major scientific conference in Zurich, Switzerland. And Bob agreed to attend and speak at this as an independent, Malcolm not reviewing or checking what he was going to say. It was just going to be a bit of a surprise. And this was all well and good with Malcolm. Bob followed through on this promise, and he did give his first public independent review of the thunderstorm generator in Zurich. And you can find those recordings of Bob speaking at that conference over on the MFMP channel, as well as a later conference he spoke at in India, and some extra clips about those events on the same topics. And we also covered those events over here on Alchemical Science. So these were really informative lectures. Bob gave a review of the thunderstorm generator, and it turned out to be very positive at Zurich. He confirmed that Malcolm's invention appeared so far to be doing what he claimed, and he hypothesized that upon deeper analysis, they would find further evidence that Malcolm Bendall's plasmoids and other reactions occurring in the thunderstorm generator were exactly the same reactions that Bob and his colleagues had already been observing and studying in their own reactors, which they come to collectively refer to as ball lightning. And this evidence that he was going to be looking for was these iron-rich crenellated spheres, primarily, the magnetic core of these ball lightning structures, and other signatures related to this. And these signatures are those which Bob had observed in these other cavitation experiments, and which have been confirmed by the independent observation of others in the past. So just a quick note about ball lightning or plasmoids. The name has always been up for debate a little. So many people have independently discovered this phenomena by this point that there are as many names for it as there are people who've discovered it. This confuses the heck out of everyone, and that is unfortunate, but you generally hear me referring to these plasma structures on the channel as either plasmoids or ball lightning. And when I'm saying plasmoids, I'm usually referring to what Malcolm calls Shamir plasmoids, which are specifically waterborne plasmoids. And I probably should be less lazy about differentiating this. There are inherent dangers related to plasmoids born in air that are not present with plasmoids born in water. So it's important to note that the term plasmoid on its own is somewhat of an umbrella term that could refer to several different things. So this is the same in the case of ball lightning, which, as I mentioned, refers to the same toroidal plasma phenomena. Not all ball lightning is the same, nor does the same thing, although there is some commonalities. Now, you may have noticed just before that I used the phrase born in water rather than produced in water. And this is intentional, and it brings us to perhaps the strangest fact about ball lightning, and something which is important to consider when we go through Bob's most recent findings shortly. Ball lightning is conscious. It is essentially a living entity with a stable form made of plasma. And although large and naturally occurring ball lightning structures have sometimes acted with alarming levels of independence, see the work of Anatoly Nikitin, his story about the diesel train, or again, MFMP for a number of poignant examples. The smaller ball lightning structures being produced within the cavitation systems could perhaps be compared to bees or birds. So they naturally attempt to keep the energy in the system they're contained within equalized. The small ball lightning structures work to keep the larger system in homeostasis. So if a suitable differential of thermal coefficient is created between the two surfaces, or in other words, a polarity is formed between the two surfaces, one with a positive charge and one with a negative charge, such as the differential created by the opposing cold and hot vortexes within the nested spheres of the thunderstorm generator, then the ball lightning structures which have formed in the previous phase of the system will essentially arc between the two polarized surfaces in an attempt to equalize their extreme opposing forces. An easy way to picture this is to observe the thin worms or tendrils of violet plasma that form between the two surfaces of the plasma globe, which was originally invented by Nikola Tesla. This is essentially the effect that is occurring in the thunderstorm generator. The brighter and larger of these reactions can actually be sometimes seen flashing from the outside of the nested spheres and pipes when the unit's running, particularly in the new so-called stubby design, which will soon be set out to global independent testing teams for peer review and analysis. These plasma arcs are the ball lightning structures reacting and arcing between the two surfaces to attempt to equalize them. Now, you may be thinking that's just how charge works, like a battery. This doesn't necessarily mean ball lightning is some kind of elastic energy worm, which is doing these things with an elemental form of consciousness. And that could be a reasonable argument if it weren't for a number of other findings, which we'll get to in full shortly when we arrive at Bob's most recent results. They're alive. I just wanted to bring this up now because it sets the scene for what we can learn from what comes next. Another thing that I should quickly mention is that a lot of people they get a little bit confused when we jump from describing ball lightning or plasmoids, balls of light, or toroids of energy to suddenly describing them as tendrils of light or worms. These worms are actually opposing vortexes, the hyperboloid or hourglass shape, the inverse shape of the toroid, meeting at the point of equilibrium, or what is commonly called a zero point, or the plane of inertia between the two polarized extremes of the vortexes. Although my wife and I designed the logo for Alchemical Science before I actually even knew about any of this, plasmoids, ball lightning, it was actually based on Marco Rodin's toroidal VBM model and the Greek letter phi, which I believe to have a more esoteric meaning than the one commonly ascribed to it. One that's probably maybe a little clearer in this context, actually, as well as Ken Wheeler's excellent explanations of the structure of the conjugate magnetodielectric field. But this symbol does indeed happen to be a plasmoid too. Most convenient, but I don't really believe in coincidences, of course, these days. These are all, of course, different ways of describing the same thing. It is a plasmoid. At any rate, you can get somewhat of an idea of how the toroid in red and the hyperboloid, the hourglass or the worm shape, consisting of the two opposing vortexes in blue in the Alchemical Science logo, simultaneously form the structures that we're talking about here. It's not a precise representation, but it certainly serves to illustrate the idea well enough. So anyway, back to the story. After the conference in Zurich, Bob put it to Malcolm that he would need to take a cutout sample from the inside of the outside spheres of the thunderstorm generator so that he could conduct deeper and independent analysis with macro photography microphotography and under the scanning electron microscope if he was to go any further with helping Malcolm prove his invention, did what he claimed. And Malcolm wasn't initially thrilled about this, I know, because I spoke to him on the phone a few days afterwards, and he was still grumbling about how he'd intended this unit to go in a museum as one of his first. But Bob gave Malcolm his ultimatum. He needed a sample for further analysis, so there was nothing further he could do to help Malcolm verify his claims. So Malcolm soon relented, and it turned out to be incredibly lucky for both Malcolm and Bob that he did. Malcolm started to cut out the sample to send to Bob, but Bob told him to pause right away to avoid any potential contamination, and he took the next plane over to London with his micro and macro photography equipment to perform the analysis immediately on site. So this all happened, and you can find videos from Bob, Johanna.
All right, perfect spot to pause it there, as this is like the pink red state of the material, and here we have the black state as well, both in Isaac Newton's color model. And here I just wanted to show the actual pink red crystalline state of the thunderstorm generator, that it's active, and that's where Isaac Newton states that you can transmutate one solid metal to another when you have them in this pink crystalline state. And I believe this is another sample of exactly that. And then the black state is the nanocoating, self-nanocoating layer that forms around such plasma structures.
Way to avoid any potential contamination, and he took the next plane over to London with his micro and macro photography equipment to perform the analysis immediately on site. So this all happened, and you can find videos from Bob, Johanna, and myself covering these results in more detail over on our respective channels. I'll be linked to down below. So these hexagonal arrays and the ring spots we see here in the image, they're riddled somewhat routinely spaced all over the sample. These were exactly what Bob had hypothesized you would find earlier in Zurich. These had a very strong, almost certain potential of being the hallmark signs of ball lightning or plasmoids that Bob had observed in the various other cavitation experiments, and those independently observed by Dr. Matsumoto previously to this. And he calculated there to be over a quadrillion of little impact marks over the entirety of the inside of the outside spheres, based on the number that could be observed on a small section of the sample. This was a very promising early indicator of the discoveries which were about to come next, and an initial validation of the hypothesis Bob had made at the Zurich conference. Next, he would be looking for further remnants of the fusion process that act as the trademark calling cards of these plasma entities under the electron microscope. In particular, the signature iron-rich crenellated microspheres that have been observed in the other reactors and in previous experiments. So signs that ball lightning was present and doing work in the system. In this case, harvesting matter like carbon and other elements and taking them through the determined and replicable steps of synthesis, or in other words, degrees of transmutation, which Bob had established as part of the baseline of his model, formed over his decade of research with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. In Bob's live and unfiltered SEM EDS sessions, analyzing two small samples cut out from both the inside sphere and the outside sphere of one of the first thunderstorm generator prototypes, he did indeed find exactly what he expected. But just minutes into the session, he began to observe not just 1 or 10, but countless crenellated microspheres, consisting primarily of iron and oxygen of many different sizes, covering many areas of the sample. And these spheres are one of the best initial indicators that ball lightning reactions have been occurring in the system. Bob compared them during his session to the structures shown in the images from a paper published by Dr. Takaki Matsumoto in 2002, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse. But they've been consistently present in other cavitation systems too. These spheres are, as Bob puts it, the magnetic core of ball lightning. When the ball lightning structures draw matter into their clockwise imploding vortex and through the zero point, or the plane of inertia, they begin to produce these magnetic crenellated iron and oxygen spheres at their core. When the reactions are finished, we find these magnetic cores deposited on the positively charged surface in the system. which in this case was, of course, the inside of the outside sphere of the thunderstorm generator, and essentially describe this process in the simplest way I possibly can. We've already established earlier that ball lightning appears to be somewhat of a conscious elemental entity. The ball lightning is feeding on available matter and energy, or these are practically the same thing as Bob explains in his videos, but they're ejecting these dense spheres afterwards as a waste product. So they're shitting them out, in other words. Is anyone else young enough to remember the Nibelonians on Futurama who ate whatever was available around them and then they shit out these balls of dark matter spaceship fuel? There was something up with that show. I'm on to you, Mr. Groening. So anyway, the SEM EDS session, of course, didn't end here. This was just the first few minutes, and throughout the rest of the multiple-hour session, Bob continued to find the story of the life of a plasmoid, written clearly on the sample. By this, I mean that he found pretty much all of the elemental and geometric signatures that he had observed in previous viable cavitation systems, including the reactors of Dr. Bingjuan Huang, who he was currently in the process of writing his groundbreaking paper with on the same phenomena at this time. And these signatures were not hard to find. The ball lightning activity occurring in the thunderstorm generator spheres was highly prolific. And again, myself, Bob, and Jahan all have videos covering these findings. You can go and check these out if you'd like to know more about this. But just to recap on a couple of significant observations, start to build the picture. These yin and yang structures are very commonly found in the analysis of the cavitation systems that he was finding here in this session. The lighter side is the yang side, the destruction zone, where matter is being torn apart and the metal is being cleaned off. And in the base material, we find iron, chrome, and nickel in the same ratios, typical of the stainless steel used to construct the sphere. And then this darker side is the yin side, and this is where the atomic reconstruction occurs. And there's a hard line between the two sides. So we find many of these crenellated microspheres here again in the darker yin area, as well as iron and oxygen-rich spheres. He also finds silica and aluminium-rich spheres and calcium co-located with sulfur. So further signatures of the stepwise transmutation process, typical for ball lightning. And what you're seeing here in these yin and yang structures, this is a really major part of Bob's new results and Nobby's models. We'll get a little more to this soon and overlay the geometry. But another significant observation was these worm-like paths riddled throughout the darker areas of the sample, which had nanospheres deposited evenly spaced along them. And Bob commented that this was very reminiscent of the idios or plasmoids eating through the diamond and silica dioxide in the late Neil Crichton Gould's Lion reactors, which also left little crystals behind in the gaps. And there's plenty more, but as I'll say, I'll leave you to check out my video, or Bob or Johanna's if you want to delve deeper into those sessions. I've just shown a few images here. And this was actually only the sample from the inside of the outside sphere. There was also the sample from the outside of the inside sphere, which Bob put under scrutiny next. So I won't go through all of this because you can go and watch the other videos about it, but it was just further confirmation that the fractal toroidal moment was occurring. We could see this same phenomena occurring, metal and elements being ripped up from one side and deposited as something else, steps of these transmutation process in certain geometries on the other side. So these initial very promising SEM EDS observations laid the groundwork for Bob and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project to move forward with recent further testing on the thunderstorm generator that we'll speak about shortly. But at this point, we knew that ball lightning was here. The transmutation process Bob had established in his model could be seen being played out in the thunderstorm generator. It was shortly after these sessions when things really started to get serious for Malcolm's plans to see the thunderstorm generator mass-produced and rolled out worldwide. Everything he'd been claiming was indeed occurring. Malcolm and Bob announced that the Indian Navy were now involved in helping spearhead the technology, the research and development in India, and that several other very large international funding entities had now committed to providing as much funding as required to see it rolled out worldwide, pending further analysis and peer review, which is happening at the moment, and this is part of that. So if you go through some of the old videos on MFMP, you'll find more hints about this and where that could be coming from. And on that note, if you're interested in putting your skin in the game yourself, you can actually invest in the thunderstorm generator. I'm very much focused on the open source side of things. And I really began covering this because it was something that could be replicated at home by experimenters like myself. And I'm glad to say it still can be built by whoever wants to give it a shot. From the hardware store parts you'll find outlined in my DIY build guide, for example. And Malcolm open sourced this, so it couldn't just go away. And it is still open source. This being said, as we all know, the results we can get from these DIY experimental prototypes at home, it's rarely going to be as efficient and reliable as a unit that's been precision engineered for specific installations and had the bugs ironed out. And there has indeed already been a lot of progress optimizing the near pre-production prototypes, including shortening the pipes and annealing and pressure quenching of the pipes and spheres, and some specific processes there that Malcolm's mentioned. So to actually get it to the stage where we can easily fit it to all of these different things that we want to, and at the level of optimization it needs to be at for large scale adoption, we do now need to see it industrially mass manufactured. And I get a lot of questions about this. So for anyone who is part of a larger concern that's interested in licensing the Thunderstorm generator nationally, Malcolm said you could reach out to Samadhi Halkett-Lewis of the Strike Foundation. And Strike Foundation is Malcolm Bendall's own organization, which was established to preserve and promote his inventions and his work. And I've put Samadhi's email up here on the screen. Land Logical Power were announced several months back as the licensee in the UK. I know they're working with Alpha Prospects, and I haven't been in contact with these guys at all at this stage, but you can find more about them on their website, and I expect you can get in touch with them about this. So for everyone else, Alpha Prospects are the company who's been working with Malcolm over the long term. They've funded a large part of his R&D so far, particularly in the early days before Malcolm had gone public with this at all. So they hold the licenses or investments in some of the other larger entities to produce and distribute the Thunderstorm generator in multiple countries, including the US and Thailand. And I believe you can find the full list and other announcements regarding that side of things on their website. So I've included their email for Alpha Prospects here too. Christopher Foster is the CEO and their main contact in the UK and in the West. And Kevin Baker is their contact for Thailand and some of those related operations. You can get in contact with either of those at that same address there. They've let me know. That I'm not giving investment advice or anything like that here, nor would I be qualified to do so, nor do I represent any of these companies, nor am I a contact for them, which is why I'm providing these details here. I'm really enthusiastic about the tech, and I have my own opinions and predictions about how this is going to go, but none of that's investment advice. This channel primarily focuses on the theory and the developments around the tech, not investment mass production.
All right, gonna pause that here there. That's dope. Tigers, New Zealand got an Ernie from back in the day with your kids. I love it. So shout out to Jordan over at Alchemical Science there. Hold on while I find the video so that anyone that wants to watch the full 2 hours that we do not have time to go over right now, here is the video link. It's also it's in the live chat now, and it is also in the video descriptions below the video, as well as the next video that we are going to be playing here, which is also has Jordan in it, but it's got a lot more of Bob Greenyer, as well as some Randal Carlson, Cosmic Summit channel, and Malcolm Bendall himself. And hopefully it should play. There we go. Oh yeah. Of course. On X, make sure you subscribe on X. Playing off of X so we don't have the commercials. All right, Cosmic Summit Live Plasmoid Edition. This, if you haven't seen it, this is one epic show.
When I showed them enough physical evidence that
supported
classified Soviet energetics research, the maths has already been done. So I didn't have to do the maths, and no one else has to do the maths. because the answer to this technology, quite naturally, it would be, is in our faces. And what I learned during this process is that all of the major symbols of power across many cultures are actual manifestations, representations, or sections or cross views of this same sacred geometry structure that is based on hydrodynamics, but essentially it's magnetohydrodynamics. And if you look at what cultures tend to do with
Sound is working.
important symbology in the past, they would place it onto in their numismic, their coins systems, their means of trade. And so you can go back many, many years. I think the Macedonian coinage is some of the most interesting, and I actually went to that part of the world very specifically last year to take photographs of these things. But specifically, you have this coinage.
We got the Tasmanian devil coming in. Bob, I want you to finish. Make sure that we don't let it go unnoted that here's the amazing Malcolm Bendall. There he is. What's up, Shaman?
Hey, fellas.
Hi, Malcolm.
Yes. On the
We'll give you
highway.
a second to get settled there and
Yeah,
get the sound right. Make sure we don't have we don't have too much of a delay. And we're expecting Randal any moment.
Yeah, no, it's good at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Might want to turn your sound down a little bit.
To drive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Malcolm, I got just from Jordan a thumbnail description of vortex mathematics, and now I'm in the middle of getting a thumbnail description of the thunderstorm generator and the principles. And Phil has introduced himself. We got, the math guy, the physics guy, and the fabricator in the room, and all of them came into this as,
well, I'm not just some wrench, George. I have a mind. Okay, I'm a thinking man, not just a grease monkey over here.
Show me your fingernails, Phil.
I do have a band-aid on my finger actually right now.
No, you are a warrior.
I'm just a wrench. You got me.
You're an indefatigable warrior for Plasmoids, man. I mean,
that is true.
Phil and I, is it a miracle or is it a physical process?
For bulk of the scientific, this isn't a flat-out impossibility. So, but then if you ask the bulk of everyone with PhD or multiple PhDs or tenureship to explain ball lightning, I can guarantee that pretty much all of them wouldn't have a clue. But it is a real thing and it exists, and they have to acknowledge that it's a real natural thing that exists. And a subset of those, I would ask them if they knew what static electricity is, and they still wouldn't know. So these are the two core components of how this technology works. So you've got to ask yourself if these people who have experienced static electricity, I don't know a scientist or even an individual over the age of 10 in the world that hasn't experienced static electricity. But the fact that they don't know what it actually is, not what it does, but what it actually is. And the fact that they don't know, for those that do know about ball lightning, and in fact, apparently, according to a study that was done, I think in the 70s or 80s, 1 in 10 people in America have actually witnessed ball lightning. So there's a good chance these people will have seen it themselves or know someone that did. The fact that they don't know that how this real physical phenomena works, then you've got to say, well, do you already know everything? Because you've demonstrated you don't. And the fact that this definitely works on this ball lightning process, how can you say that this is impossible? So I don't think it's a miracle. I think it's just a gift from nature. It was usually in the past, as I was going to say at the start of the call, it's in the numismic record. They literally have these thunderbolt coins that are pre-Christ, which exactly show the structure of ball lightning. Without a shadow of doubt. And they literally call them thunderbolts.
Memory, though, at that time? Was that just something that was kind of encoded in their mythology and their iconography? They didn't, and we're just speculating here, but the Romans didn't have a thunderstorm generator, right?
Well, the Romans, you see, the Romans took on the Vorsprung shield, the heart crack shield, and the heart crack shield comes from ancient Greece, and so I think there was some understanding. It went all over Europe. And I do know that the Romans were in fear of the Pict people. So a few years ago in 2021, I think 2021, I did a tour round and took incredible imagery of the Pict stones in northern Scotland. And you have to understand that the Romans actually built a wall called Hadrian's Wall, to keep them out. Why were they so fearful of these savages? What was so well? If you look at the Pict stones, and I will probably, it might be something that I will discuss at the conference. Actually, they show probably quite a good understanding of this technology. Now, how, I don't know. That's a question that needs to be answered in some other way. But essentially, it's all over the ancient world. This technology. So I think there were people, probably wizards and warlocks, as you might have called them in the past, and monks who, if you go to a place, for instance, in Prague Museum, there are illustrations in these monk illustrated, books, and it's clear that they knew the technology. I'm hearing myself, so it's a bit weird.
Somebody's got a second stream going. If anybody's playing a video, see if you can pause it.
Can you hear me, George?
Yeah, I can hear you, but are you playing a video somewhere, Randall?
No, I don't think so. No, I am not. I'm thinking kind of loudly, but I don't think that's it.
Someone's got the live stream playing in the background.
Well, who doesn't want to hear Bob twice?
Okay.
It's gone now.
Excellent, Phil. Okay, now it's gone. Thank you for your patience, everyone. This is a shoestring budget operation, but it's the most important damn thing happening on Earth. So appreciate your patience. Good evening, Dr. Carlson. How are you doing?
I'm doing well now that I'm finally in. After multiple routes and attempts, I finally made it. I cracked the secret code. I proved myself worthy, and here I am.
Okay.
For better or worse.
Complete responsibility, and sorry for the technical difficulties, but it is wonderful to have you. We had briefly there a proper attendance. We had everybody for about 2 minutes there. We had Malcolm on too, but we keep losing him for God knows what reason. But and I kind of like to bring him on before we get back to you, Randall, because I want to talk about the No Show Joe show. Okay. And that was the recording that you did with Jogan and Malcolm Bendall in January of 2023. And it might have been a little premature. And I've heard you say publicly that, hey, yeah, it's January 23.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Never forget it. Yeah. Yeah. And we went on a road trip down to Austin. And we went and filmed 3 hours and 20 minutes of the damnedest podcast in the history of the medium. I mean, it was wild. The security guys were calling their girlfriends on the phone going, you would not believe who Joe's got on today. This is great. We were high-fiving. It's the greatest podcast of all time. But Joe didn't show it. Okay? Now, the thing is, I think that's kind of justifiable. He's got a lot going on. He had a kind of something of a surprise guest, didn't have time to vet it. There's some, mud that's been thrown on Malcolm in the past. That's all you saw back then. And I think Joe made a justifiable gut decision that this guy could walk out of my studio, open up a penny stock tomorrow, and somehow take advantage of my people when I haven't vetted it properly.
Sure.
So I get it. But I have no such concerns, gentlemen. We're going to say it all at the Cosmic Summit. Okay. So there he is, Malcolm Bendall coming in again.
Well, you know, George, when we did that interview at Joe's, that was when he was right in the middle of that whole controversy over Spotify and Neil Young and others boycotting them, and so he was dealing with that, and I suspect that played a role in his, his reaction to the whole thing. And he thought, I don't think I want to run the risk here. I don't need any more controversy right now. But
Yeah,
I
that's
suspect
right.
the day will come when we reconnect. And at the time, I did my well. You were there. You heard the whole thing, didn't you?
Oh yeah, yeah.
You guys were out in the front room there listening to it all.
In the green room.
In the green room,
out there with the antlers and the wolf statue. It's
the
pretty darn
werewolf.
cool. And I tell you, there's nothing so disappointing to your friends and confusing is, hey, I'm going to Joe Rogan. I'm going to go down to Joe Rogan. I'm not going to be on it, but we're filming it. I'm going with Randal Carlson and this inventor fella. It's going to be really interesting. Then you get back from Austin and say, well, he's not going to show it. I mean, what could go worse, for your own credibility than you go on Joe Rogan, but you go with a crowd that's so crazy that you can't get it published, But I think, and I bet we all feel this. There's something about this tech that says it's just gotta come from the bottom to the top. And we came very close to having a shortcut to the top there, where you came with the biggest microphone on earth. But it didn't happen. So so be it. Love Joe Rogan. My God, he's done more for the younger dry ice impact hypothesis than any of the scientists have.
Sure.
He's just a wonderful, wonderful communicator of esoteric stuff and just a critical part of the communication ecosystem worldwide right now. So we didn't make the cut this time, but we're going to do it next time, and we're going to have all the same information at the Cosmic Summit.
Well,
Malcolm, are you there, buddy?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Randal.
I was just going to say that, what's happened since January of 2023 is, all the testing and the presentations that have been done that didn't exist then. So there was we couldn't refer to the Tesla tech. We couldn't refer to Zurich. Some of the other things that are going on, the industrial build out hadn't happened in London yet. So there was a lot of things that I knew that things were coming up, but I didn't know specifically what and when and where. I knew that there would be a testing program at some point in the near future, and then we could circle back with ammunition in hand and sit Joe down. Hey, Joe, you need to take a look at this, my friend, because
all right, I'm gonna stop that one there and put here is the link for the full video there in the live chat now, and it is also in the video description. And I'm going to be having Bob Greenyer on again very soon, and there's lots of questions we've got for him, as well as to give him some of the samples of the different, what I am sure is the exact same effects, the little cylinder balls, the different transmutations that Jordan was going over at the beginning of this video, that I am also reproducing in the electrodes of my electrolysis experiments. We're just under an hour here. We're going to keep this one to an hour tonight, as I've got a busy day tomorrow. And also, I am kind of angry that I don't have the other camera working. Once again, I will show the issue that I'm having here. Even when I remove myself and mute everything out, it still does the horrible reverb. Right. Whoa. Like, why? As long as I don't talk. Shit, I talk. All right, so enough of that. Clearly you can see it's horrible and don't want to mess with everybody's ears. What else did I have to present? Always so much more. Yes, like for instance, the self-organization of lots of the monoatomic materials that I make. Oh, also the Keshi, sometime after May 15th, so last 2 weeks of May, I am going to be interviewing Mehran Keshi himself of the Keshi Foundation Spaceship Institute. That I learned so much of this electrolysis, Ormus, GANs, plasma, plasmid, triple solenoid coil stuff about, and that is going to be a good one. Also, April 29th, Wandering Wolf production. Shout out Michael Collins. Going to be having him on at 5 p.m. on April 29th. And then Monday, May 3rd, also going to have next Science of Sound episode with Jody B Music coming back, as well as Crystal Fresh joining us. So it's going to be one heck of a good show. Woo Woo Wednesday coming back this Wednesday with Hans Dietrich as well. And more episodes to come with electrolysis, with artwork, and with alchemy, free energy, alternative history, EVOs, self-organization, real science, adect alchemy, and everything else that we do here. Adam Baum, I don't understand the Bert and Ernie. It's just, it's a pun on my own name of Bernie, and between them is the alchemy, the electrolysis jar experiments that I'm doing. There's monoatomic material forming at the top. Also, there's bubbling up hydrogen. The other camera kind of shows it better, but sadly, it's not really working today. But yeah, love you all, and we will see you on the next one. And ta-ta for now.
You crazy mother. Yeah.
It's just Bernie!
Hey, Bernie, just like last week, huh?